Hi, this is Andrea.
And this is Fiorenza.
Welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. We are so excited to have you here with us.
The purpose of this podcast is to bring voices together to talk about belonging. Through inspiring, real-life conversations with our guests, we learn about how belonging can show up in so many different ways, what it feels like to belong, and the impact of truly belonging.
In each episode, we will offer you inspirational and practical strategies to find your true voice in your life, in society, and as a leader. Let's dive in.
Hi, Jessica. We are so happy to have you on the podcast today with us. I've been following your work on belonging for a while, and both Andrea and I particularly resonated with your work on modern belonging. We were like, we must have her on the podcast. So we were so excited and so much looking forward to this episode today. So Jessica, you are the Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Belonging Care Lead at Modern Health. And you have a PhD in counseling psychology. You're a practitioner, scientist, and advocate, and your research focus is primarily centered around culturally centered clinical practice. We are so excited to just get into a little bit more of the details and dive in. And to get started, we'd love to hear more about you and your story in your own words.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. So thank you both for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to chat a little bit more about mental health, belonging, and the intersection of culture and mental health, all things that I'm very, very passionate about. As you mentioned, a little bit about me. So I am a licensed psychologist. I currently am based in Houston, Texas. And I am really with Modern Health working in kind of the digital mental health platform space. And so that's where you've heard about what you mentioned, the modern belonging, our playbook. We had our conference, our Elevate session, where we had several sessions on belonging. What does it mean? And for me, it's something that's just really important when we think about how to help people feel like they are inclusive or included. And so the way that we like to frame it at Modern Health is I always explain it to people as like a equation, right? So we talk a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And so people often are like, how do you measure that? And I'm like, well, if you have diverse populations, communities, employees, whatever the languages you use where you work at, along with equitable products and services, which equity is very important, and inclusive, right? So how are we thinking about the needs of people? Then people will feel like they belong. And this is something that's been important to me since grad school, of thinking about how do we, when we talk about mental health, who is not being considered in the picture? And often that shows up in research, it shows up, then trickles down to clinical practice because people treat and diagnose and have interventions based on how they were trained. And the training normally in the textbooks comes from the research. So if we are not looking at different populations in the research, it doesn't reach to training. And then what we're doing to help and support any populations is not supportive of all populations.
Oh, very, very needed and important. No? And we totally can see your passion, knowledge, everything about this work. And I love the equation. I also wrote down here because it looks very simple, but we know that in the reality is not it is. Mm-hmm. So in this equation, now in diverse, equitable, and inclusive, how would you define belonging, or even in your work in modern health? What is this belonging for you, Jessica?
A simplified way of thinking about it to me is feeling like home. I always tell people, like, when you feel like you belong somewhere. And I think often in corporate America and research and all of these different places, we get caught up in the numbers. And so people are like, how do I measure this? And I'm quick to remind people that qualitative research also counts as a way to measure. And qualitative is really is a sense of what are the context for people's experiences. And I'm like, we all know that. Like when I go home, I'm from Maryland, I have a sense of like who I can be in this space. When I go to my mother's house, it's a feeling, right? I cannot always describe it. It's not like you walk in the door and I'm like, hello, I feel like I'm at home. You just know, right? I can leave my stuff here. I can be all of who I am. If I want to yell and scream, if I want to cry, if I just want to sit on this couch and do nothing, I know that I can do that there, right? And it's not like my mom has to every time say, welcome, you can do these things. It's a feeling. You walk in the door and you're like, these are my people. I belong here. And that's how I think about belonging is when you are somewhere, what is your feeling of being included? We also all know what it feels like to be on the periphery somewhere. Again, it's a feeling. You have been somewhere, whether it's a conference, whether it's a dinner party that you were invited to, you didn't know anybody, anywhere that you go, you know what it feels like. You have a sense of like, I don't really fit in here, right? And it's an innate knowledge, like you just feel that of like, doesn't feel comfortable, right? And so when I think of belonging, my goal is to tap into that feeling. When you are in a space, do you just feel like, I can relax, my shoulders can be down, and I'm not constantly being hyper vigilant about who I'm trying to be in this space.
And there was something in the playbook you mentioned about psychological safety, and especially, well, I guess generally speaking, how important it is, and also in workplaces, and how that is a crucial element, or rather a foundational element, to then have this feeling of belonging. There was a mention to some research, some surveys around workplaces recognizing that it's foundational, yet there's still things that need to be done and addressed. What would be your top tip to have more of a psychological safety in our environment?
I think the first thing, ask someone. It is such a basic thing. And I am always surprised at how often people are, when I'm like, is that what your employees are asking for? Or is that what this group is asking for, your ERG? And people are like, I'm not sure. And I'm like, well, let's ask them, right? We make a lot of assumptions, especially when we're in leadership positions. We make a lot of assumptions about what could be right or what will be the best thing for the people who we're kind of in charge of. And often with the best intentions. When I am making a decision, I am having the best intentions. I really want to support them. But it goes back to the basic of what is it? Have we asked them? And, you know, I really started to think about psychological safety and it's the need for it when we're thinking about cultural competence and mental health. Several years ago, I was at a conference and they broke us up into these kind of tables and you were supposed to have a conversation. And somebody was talking about this being a safe space for them. And I did not feel like it was a safe space. And so just in the middle of that conversation, I was like, well, said who? And everyone was like, what? And I was like, well, who determined that this was a safe space? And they were like, well, that's what we have created. And I was like, but I don't feel safe. So how do you get to decide that this is a safe space for me? It's a safe space for you. But when we call things safe spaces, and it's been a buzzword that we use, you didn't ask me if I felt safe here. So it feels safe for you. And that is something that after that, I started thinking about. And I ask people, I'm very intentional about calling a space a safe space. I'll say it feels safe for me, but you get to determine what makes it feel safe for you. For some people, it can be as basic as I feel heard, right? I feel validated. Other people are like, no, that's not enough. I need more than to be heard and validated. I also need to know that there are policies in place about what other people can say, right? So in order for me to feel safe, I need to feel heard, I need to feel validated, and we need to have some guidelines in this space about what can be shared here for me to feel safe. Somebody else might say, in the work that I've done on myself, a lot of my inner work, all the spaces feel safe for me. I don't need anything, right? And so I think when we think about psychological safety in the space that we're creating, my tip is always ask people, what do they need to make the space feel safe? Because it's going to change before we make suggestions, alterations, or recommendations to create what feels safe for the person making the decision.
So true, so powerful and so true, because this is such a personal and delicate subject, right? So like you said, what is for someone is will be different for the other one. So we cannot, even on the DNI, the unconscious bias, we say that we cannot make assumptions and stereotypes. So nothing better than just clear asking questions. So
right. And if I may, like an example of this, I think, is when we have discussions and people have different topics, I'll call them difficult conversations, compassionate conversations, like all of these discussions where we talk about where we say we're talking about hard or difficult topics. The first question I always ask is, who added the qualifier, right? Something, for example, for me, talking about race does not feel hard or difficult because I am a Black woman. I talk about it, think about it most of my life. So you determining that that is difficult or hard, it's difficult or hard for who, right? So even when we title things, I'm like, who are we considering in that? But then if we go a step further, there are sometimes people have conversations where they have guidelines. And I'm like, there are some people who prefer not to have guidelines. It's like, why should I need to police how I'm talking or what I'm saying if I'm talking about my own experience? Where other people will say, we need to have very strict guidelines. We're not going to use this language, or we're only going to use I language and how we communicate. And that's what they need to feel safe. And I think when you have just that conversation of what's needed to feel safe versus just doing guidelines, people get an understanding of where everybody else is for their baseline, right? And I think that that is something that is underrated. And when I did my postdoc fellowship at the VA in Los Angeles, and I learned this exercise called conocimiento, which means to have knowledge of. And we used to start all of our race-based traumatic stress groups for the veterans with this exercise, because it talked about, what is your first experience with race? What was your first positive experience with it, right? It asks like these 4 questions so that people can see that everyone's coming from a different baseline. And it sets the tone of like understanding what somebody else might need to feel safe to be able to participate. What do they already have knowledge of to participate in the conversation?
Beautiful. So even in the talking a lot that you start touching about the cultural identity, you know, the race factor and the difference, the cultural identity that of us human beings. What is even based in your research, what is the link, what is the impact that you in your study and your experience of the cultural factor and the mental health?
I think the best framework to understand this is social determinants of mental health, which has a framework and shows how our experiences with different social identities, so how my experience depending on my age, depending on my geographical location, depending on my level of education, depending on all of these different things, race, my gender identity, gender expression, all of these things will put us in experiences that could cause events to happen. And that links to mental health. So I'll outline the framework and then give you an example, right? So when we think about social identities, we're thinking whole person. One of the things I always ask people when we consider this is, which part of your identity would you not want considered, right? And most people don't have anything that they would let go of. It's like, well, let's say that you had to go to the hospital, you had a heart attack. What would you want the doctor to not consider? Would you want him to not consider your age? Would you want him to forget your gender and like that doesn't matter? Would you want him to forget your race or ethnicity, which might have anything related to like your prevalence for hypertension and things like that? Which part would you want not considered? And people always want the whole person considered. It's the same thing for mental health. And so when we consider all of that, then we have to go a little bit deeper and think intersectionality. How do different parts of our social identities come together to maybe further oppress us and put us in a position to have an experience that will influence our mental health, which is the social determinants of mental health framework. So an example of this is, if I am a 50-year-old Latinx queer woman who lives on the South Side of Chicago, there are certain experiences that I might be prone to that could influence my mental health, right? Have I been discriminated against? So when I walk down the street, are there things that people say to me because that's going to influence my mental health? Do I have a sense of community on the South Side of Chicago, right? Is it because at 50, I also face age discrimination when I'm trying to get a job and all of these things that come together, right? Somebody with the exact same thing, even if we move geographical location, let's say a 50-year-old Latinx queer woman who lives in Baltimore, very different experience, right? And so when you look at social determinants of health, it's going to be like, well, maybe in Baltimore, because the socioeconomic status in that area is lower, that maybe you're in poverty. It's stressful to not have money, right? That's just a fact that we can all say, like, when you can't afford to pay your bills, it's stressful. So now I have added stress. We know that Baltimore is a predominantly African-American community. Maybe now I have a lack of support. We know that loneliness can have the same impact on your overall health as smoking packs of cigarettes. I think it's 15 packs of cigarettes is where we're at. So if you don't have a sense of community, so now your mental health is very different living in Baltimore than it is Chicago, even though you have the same social identities, because your geographical location has changed. And we can substitute out all kinds of things. We could change the age. There's going to be a different influence. We can change the ethnicity or the race. It's going to be a different influence. And so when we think about how our social identities impact our mental health, it's like, because the social identities are what are influence the experiences that we have, right? It's going to be very different for a woman versus a man, right? It's going to be very different for a trans man or woman versus somebody who is saying that they go by their biological sex. And so then they're like, okay, I identify as a cis man compared to a trans man. Very different experiences. And those experiences then are going to influence my mental health, how I'm treated in the world.
And it's very, fascinating to hear you consider all those elements. And I feel like we are finally coming to a societal sense that there is this, there's a whole person. There isn't just who you are at work or with your family, with your friends, and then who you truly are. There's, at last, there is a recognition that there's the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you see belonging fitting in if there's mental health and the D&I space? Where and how do you see belonging fit in?
Maslow, on his hierarchy of needs, which is like psychology 101, maybe even psychology 100, talks about the hierarchy of needs. What do we need? The basic needs to survive as humans. Belonging is on there. It's the reason why people join the PTA, why people might join a gang, why people join a sports team, different things. We all have an innate need to feel connected somehow, right? And so the way that our brains work and the way that we categorize things, it automatically happens. Think about how you might, if you had to remember a long string of numbers, you're going to block them. You're going to categorize them. Be like, okay, these numbers come first. And then if I do 2 + 2 is 4, then I can remember 4 comes. Like, you work it out in your brain. We do the same thing for everything else. The way that we remember people's names or how to get somewhere is we identify it with something, right? So if you think about it, I have an innate need to belong, and I've an innate need to connect, and my brain automatically categorizes, I start looking for ways that I fit into the category, right? So why do I join the PTA? Something about them resonates with something about me. I feel like I belong here. Maybe they bake a lot of cookies. I bake a lot of cookies. I want to be a part of a group that bakes a lot of cookies, right? In my early career, I worked in detention centers, juvenile and adults, and took classes on, I think the name of classes were like, there were classes related to gangs, but like really just understanding why people are in juvenile detention, adult detention, that kind of thing, kind of like law classes or criminal justice classes. Uh-huh. And a lot of what we learned is when you talk to people about why they joined a gang, they wanted a sense of belonging. I wanted a family, right? I wanted to feel protected. I wanted to feel safe. And so they then look for like-minded people. Maybe because where I live, someone is judging me, so I can't join the PTA. I won't feel like I belong there. But these people up the street, I feel like I belong. They accept me. They don't care what I'm wearing. And I have that sense of safety and that sense of family I'm looking for. So we start to categorize in our brains, right? This is a group that I can identify with. And so then I'm going to join them. And now I feel like I belong. When we do not feel like we belong, it influences our mental health. The fact I gave you earlier about the loneliness has a significant influence on our mental health. This is why many people have struggled during the pandemic. They were isolated, they were quarantined, they could not get that sense of connection. So when we think D, E, and I, and at Modern Health, we call it the DEIB, at work, if you are not feeling a connection, you're going to feel isolated. It's going to have a direct effect on your mental health. There's research, it's in our Modern Playbook, the article we cited. We know that a sense of belonging is directly linked to symptoms of anxiety and depression, right? Because when you feel like you do not belong, you cannot connect, you feel that loneliness. It is directly influencing your health and your mental health. So if I am at work and I am the only Black woman that works for my company, that's the DEIB piece, right? I'm the only one here. I might not feel like I can connect. What if I work with all men and none of them identify as Black? So there's two ways I don't feel like I can connect. And maybe I don't feel like my voice is heard. And we know in all the research, women get paid less. So now I'm also feeling like I'm disconnected in this way. All of that is going to influence my mental health. So if you want to create an inclusive environment, you need to think about all the different social identities at your job and how you can create a space where people can find that sense of connection so they feel like they belong and then they don't feel lonely. And I know that's like a long-winded way to get to your question, but it's like trying to figure out the journey of like, how are all these things connected?
But they are all connected, because as thinking about us as a whole person, this is us, like we are all connected, and this is the need, not the Maslow, the need of human beings, like to feel safe, so it's all connected. I'm curious, Jessica, when was a time, your first time, or when it happens that maybe you felt that you belong, or maybe moments that you felt that you didn't belong? How was that for you?
I could probably recount tons of times I felt like I did not belong. I think to focus, one of the first time I felt like I really belonged, I grew up in an area that does not have a lot of communities of color in it. It is predominantly white high school. When I graduated high school, we had 400 students in our graduating class, and about 20 or less identified as Black or African American. So it was not an area where there were a lot of people who looked like me. And then I went to an HBCU, which is a historically Black college university. I went to North Carolina A&T, even though it was like far from my family. When I went on college tours, my parents were like, they took me to all these schools. When I set foot on A&T's campus, I was like, oh, I love it here. Like just being around all these people who look like me, but there was so much culture. And it was in the South, and it was like the food was different, and they all drove cars. And cars that are like older cars that they kind of fix up, they call them slabs in the South. And they had all these slabs, and it was like the music and people were like playing back. It was like this whole different thing. And I was like, oh, this is where I'm going to school. Didn't even know what my major was going to be or what I wanted to do. And that's where I went. And when I went there, it was one of the first times that I was like, oh, I don't need to pretend anything here. I don't need people. I don't have to explain things. I don't have to explain why I wear my hair a certain way. I don't have people asking me questions about, can I tan at the pool? Like I just get to exist and no one is asking me these questions. And so it was the first time I was like, this is really what it feels like to belong outside of my family. So right, I had the same feeling when I'm with my family, but when I was in school or different activities, you're always conscious of like, it's harder for me to connect with people who don't quite get my experience, right? And then at A&T, I don't have to explain things to people. They get it. I can make a reference to a movie and we've all seen it, or most of us have seen it. And people aren't like, what show is that? I'm like, here, people know what show I'm referencing without me saying it, right? That for me is a sense of belonging. And I think that was the first time where it really made an impact, where I was like, oh, okay, this is a different experience.
Yeah, I hear you.
Really that I hear this intense, almost instant connection that you felt. And it's true, going back to what you were sharing earlier around the feeling of belonging, that sometimes, we can't quantify it or really put it in a tangible way. It goes down to that, having this feeling that we are safe, that there's points in common, shared interest, even in some cases. Yeah. So you've mentioned college, and it makes me want to kind of take a little bit of a step back, maybe. And I'm super curious to know, to know more about how you made the choice to be in this field. You're obviously so passionate about it. How did that happen for you?
I think quite by accident. And to this day, so I come from a family of teachers. I have several siblings. One of my sisters is a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My grandma was a teacher. My father taught for a while. So when I went to college, and originally I had a major. My major was like fashion merchandising. And, I always tell people I have amazing parents because they didn't fight it. They were like, yeah, you're going to go and you're going to change it. So write whatever you want, pick what you want. It'll change. And in college, of course, and I was like, I'm going to be a teacher like everyone else. And it was required to take a psychology course. And so I had already taken my first praxis to become a teacher and was already like preparing for the practicum when you're in the classroom, and took this class and like fell in love with psychology. And then I was like, I'm going to change my major, which actually extended me in college. So I did not finish in 4 years. And everyone's like, what do you do with that? I don't know, but I love this class and I want to take all these other classes. And I had a great mentor. She is a counselor, Dr. Rochelle Barnes, who kind of took me under her wing and was like, you have to apply for grad school. And I didn't know what I was doing and got in. And I think throughout that, I have really had excellent mentors who have helped me to figure out what it is I want to be able to do in this space, and recognizing it is not enough to have a passion, but how do you apply that? What do you do with it? And figuring that out. And I think for me, once I got into psychology, I was like, I love this. And I love being able to talk about, I think about it often like a puzzle. When I see clients, what are the symptoms that are causing the distress? How do we help diagnose you? How do we help figure out how to help you to feel better, and all of that? And so that is really what drew me in. And the more that I got involved, I was like, why are we not thinking about how all of these other things influence mental health? And for example, like my dissertation was looking at Division I Black male athletes and male student athletes. And it was funded by the NCAA, but what started it was the protest by the football team at the University of Missouri. I was watching it on TV. And I don't know if you remember, it happened in like 2015, maybe 2015, 2016. Essentially, the football team decided they weren't playing any more games because of the mistreatment.
I remember.
And yeah, you remember it caused they were on the news. It cost universities a lot of money when your players don't play, and you can't actually force them to play. And my immediate thought was, what is the mental health effects of this? These boys are 18, 19, 20 on scholarships, standing up to an entire university system for mistreatment, not knowing what's going to happen. How is that affecting their mental health? And they're constantly on the news, right? And people have good opinions and bad opinions. And so it was like, well, how does that influence how they're able to do all these other things, right? And so to me, that's an example of how our social identities, because for them, not only do you have the stress of being on TV, possibly losing your scholarship and all these other things, but also, are people calling you names because you're identifying as Black and doing this? What is it like to be a male, right? Where a Black male, where people may see you more as more aggressive, but you also have protective factors. You are on a scholarship. So your housing is taken care of, your food is taken care of, right? You have a team that's supporting you. Like, how do all these things come together, and does it have an influence on mental health? And that's kind of like when I started thinking about how do we consider cultural factors and how they may be different for so many people. And the first question was, does it have an influence on your mental health? And there's a lot of literature that says it does, but then how, right? How is it affecting? Is it positive? Is it negative? What is the effect that's happening?
I remember that because my son at that time was in high school playing football in high school. He's in college now. Mm-hmm. And being from a multicultural family, like when we came to US, he was 8-9 years old. So we have a household that are not the American household, and accents and things like that. Anyways, but going back to what I was saying, he explained to me the situation. He said, Mom, look at this. They are protesting about this and this and that. That all he was the one who explained to me, because probably they were talking also with coach and the other football team players. So that not just impacted directly their community, but there is a system that indirectly can be impacted as well.
Right. Right. I mean, in that situation, or if I recall correctly, the chancellor stepped down and maybe the president of the university stepped down. So they had a huge impact, but then what is the impact on the people who made the difference? The football players, right? And I think that, when things like that are on the news, people forget about their identities. It's very different for a 40-year-old to stand up for their rights. At 18, that's a huge thing, right? So even when we think about the whole person, even their age influenced their mental health in that situation, because I don't think at 18, I would have been willing to give up potentially going to college on a scholarship because if I was mistreated, right? It would have been scary. It would have been like, whoa, you're asking a lot. But now in my 30s, I'm like, yes, I absolutely have a different awareness and a different knowledge base to advocate. So even when we think about social identities, things like age, how did being 18, now that follows you for the rest of your life, how does that influence your mental health compared to doing something like that at 40 or 50 or however old?
For sure.
So Jessica, we have a couple of closing prompts that we like to ask our guests. The first one is, what would be the best advice that you have received and that you'd like to share with others?
Got it. The best advice I received was when I was in my first year of my PhD program. We got paired with a buddy, and my buddy was a person who was 1 year above me. And I was, when you first join everyone, you are overwhelmed with busyness. You want to join all the research clubs and participate in all the clubs. You want to do everything. And he did not do these things. And one day I was like, what are you not doing this? And he was like, Jessica, there is no PhD plus. At the end of the day, we're going to have the same letters behind our names, except you might be stressed and burnt out, and I am going to be feeling fine. And it sticks with me of like, his point was like to be intentional, right? He's like, you don't get extra credit because you do everything. But he was intentional about what he did. And he was on research teams and did things. But from my point of view, I was like, you don't look busy. And he was like, I don't need to look busy to still have an impact, but we're going to end up in the same place. And so I think about that often when I'm choosing what I'm engaging in. Am I trying to get extra credit? Am I trying to get a cookie, the plus sign after my name? Like, am I trying to do it because I'm like, I'll get something? Or is it like, am I being intentional because I'm going to get to the same place that I'm supposed to be at, right? I'm going to get there and someone else is going to also get there. I don't need to do everything to get ahead. And that sticks with me often.
So true.
That is such an amazing advice. I mean, we there's so much just busyness, right, around, and it's a high risk. So I really like that. I really like that, and it applies, if, even in the workplace. For sure. It's
a true light bulb moment when he gave it to me. I was like, oh, you're right. We are going to end up in the same place, and I don't need to do all of these extra things to get there.
Yeah. Our next question is, the world would be a better place if
people had more self-compassion. I know that we talk a lot about kindness and empathy, and I think that's a high expectation. I don't know that we can expect people to be kind and empathetic to others if they are unable to do it for themselves. And so when we tell people to be kind, I'm like, you're asking them to do something that they may not actually know. They don't know that feeling. And so I think if we could have more self-compassion for ourselves, be less critical of self, have a little bit more grace, a little bit forgiveness of self, it will feel easier to then give it to other people, right? I'm experiencing it myself. I want to share this with someone, and I know what it feels like. And I think, to me, it's like asking somebody who's very self-critical, then telling them to be kind to other people. They don't know how to do that, right? They don't have a language to do it because they're not doing it even internally. And yourself is a person you're with every day, all day, right? So if I can't be kind to some like myself and I'm with myself 24/7, how much more difficult is it to be kind to a stranger I don't even know?
That is so true. And I'm going to be cheeky here and add a super quick follow-up question. So if you have someone that has never practice self-compassion. And I think we may have all here met a few. Where do you start? How do you start?
I would borrow from a self-compassion meditation. Dr. Kristen Neff is at UT Austin, does a lot of work on self-compassion, and she has a meditation. And the way to start is she has people envision a person or like an animal, something that's human or alive, not just human, I should say, alive, that you care a lot about. And it's like, think about all the good things you want for that. So all the good things you want for your dog or your cat or your daughter or your partner. And then you practice turning it inward. So often we want good things for that person. We don't know how to treat them that way, but we have good intentions, good wishes for them that we have not turned on ourselves, right? And so that is a place to start. If you don't know how to have compassion for yourself, envision someone or something you care about and take all of that and like literally close your eyes. I have people do it sometimes. I'm like, stand under it like it's rain. Think about all those wishes and now throw them on yourself like it's rain and allow yourself to accept it, right? And that is a place to start because, you know, it's like when you give advice and people are always like, I'm like, well, what would you tell your friend if they came to you with this? And they have all these things to say. And I'm like, but why aren't you doing the same thing? And I'm like, but I'm like, you're your friend, right? Yeah. So sometimes we do need to envision what we would want for someone else and give it to ourselves to have that self-compassion. And then I think that helps to generate the kindness. Like, then how can I help that person that I want those good things for? How can I help support them? Because now I know what that feeling is like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing this tangible resource. Thank you so much for this conversation, for being with us on our podcast. It really means a lot. Really feel inspired and a super high energy, actually, even if it's the end of the day for me.
Thank you again for being such a rich conversation. Such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you. I appreciated the conversation. It's probably clear. I get passionate about it. That's when you see all the hands moving as I'm talking. And it is something that I care a lot about. And so I am honored that you invited me, and thank you for having me and allowing me to share my voice and my thoughts.
Thank you for listening to the Belonging Project podcast. We hope you enjoy our deep dive into belonging and listening amazing stories from our guests.
We'd love you to share about the Belonging Project with your friends and colleagues. And also, we'd be delighted to connect on LinkedIn and share more about our experiences. Thank you again, and stay tuned for the next episode.